On the streets of the city that endured the world's longest lockdown, Victoria's proposed new pandemic laws have become a polarising community flashpoint. In the latest act of a public campaign, last night protesters mounted a vigil outside State Parliament as those inside prepared to debate the bill today.
I can see why it has happened. We've had essentially a 2-year in and out of lockdown situation, so people are very sensitive.
The powers that are granted to the Health Minister under this Act are undefined. That means they are, in essence, unlimited.
The legislation is designed to replace Victoria's state of emergency powers, which have been used since March 2020 but were never designed for the long term and have had to be renewed regularly. They're due to expire again on December 15th, by which time the government hopes to enact the new laws. The legislation would transfer the power to declare a pandemic from the Chief Health Officer to the Premier. It gives the government the same powers it currently has under emergency orders to do things like restrict the movement of citizens, ban gatherings and force businesses to close. They could be extended up to 3 months at a time without a maximum time period. Under the bill, the government must also release the health advice underpinning public health orders.
I say very mainstream people are very concerned about this bill.
Victoria's opposition has pounced on community concern over the proposed laws.
The bill itself is giving the government much more power to cause these lockdowns and to do this at will. It'll give the Premier the personal power to declare a pandemic, even if there's no infection in the country. He will be able to do that. So we say it's too much power.
The Victorian government argues the laws are in fact designed to create more checks and balances.
What we are now on the verge of is stepping out of this pandemic in a safe way into 2022.
Your average punter might look at these laws and think, well, we're coming out the other side of a pandemic. Why do we need new far-reaching legislation?
Whilst we are coming out of this, what this legislation does is frame around pandemic-specific provisions to both get us continue the path out of this pandemic, and if in any time in the future there are further pandemics that are appropriately declared, to give a pandemic-specific provision rather than the general state of emergency arrangements. We still are going to need, after the 15th of December, limited powers to make sure that we balance safety with rights.
Protests have been mounting for weeks and at times have turned ugly. Last week, Premier Daniel Andrews was advised by police to abandon a press conference that was crashed by protesters. Late yesterday, 3 crossbenchers who are key to passing the legislation agreed on amendments with the government, including a reduction in fines for breaching public health orders and a stronger threshold for declaring a pandemic. Human rights experts agree more transparency is needed on government decisions.
At the moment, we don't have a publication of the Chief Health Officer advice and we don't have publication of the Charter of Human Rights Assessment. So the big improvement of the pandemic bill is that the Charter has to be considered and that statement has to be publicly tabled. It's put on the department website.
Human rights law expert Dr Maria O'Sullivan broadly supports the bill, but would like to see amendments including recognising protest as an essential activity and a better definition in what's known as the aggravated offence provision.
Basically, it says if you knew or were likely to know that you were liable to spread COVID to someone else, you can be fined or put into prison for 2 years. I would say that's a disproportionate response to a public health matter, firstly. And secondly, it's out of line with other jurisdictions.
While welcoming the amendments, sections of the legal profession have raised concerns the powers granted by the bill still lack sufficient oversight.
There are still significant transparency and accountability problems because the public health advice still remains unpublished for up to 7 days after the decision is made, which means 7 days while people's rights are being affected
Stuart Maiden is one of 60 senior lawyers who signed a letter to the government arguing the powers are too broad.
I've been practicing law for 20 years, Nadia, and I've never seen 60 QCs sign a letter to express concerns about the operation of legislation. I feel that when I see legislation that makes such significant inroads on civil liberties and has such significant impacts on the operation of representative democracy, that it's incumbent on me, and colleagues share my view, to bring that to the attention of the public.
Can you guarantee that people's rights will be not weakened or lessened under this legislation, but actually enhanced? Is that an undertaking you can give?
What we can undertake is that we will keep Victorians safe whilst protecting human rights. This will be the only legislative framework in the country that will have at its heart the transparency and the accountability that demonstrates to the Parliament, and through the Parliament the people of Victoria, that we are keeping them safe whilst ensuring our human rights are protected.
It is a bad bill. The powers are too broad. The subjective test for the Premier to declare a pandemic is too weak. The controls around that are too weak. The lack of transparency is a problem.
Aren't these laws actually providing more accountability and transparency by requiring the government to release its health advice?
The transparency aspect in this bill is poor. The government has a very poor record on transparency with this.
The bill has already passed Parliament's lower house and is being debated in the upper house this week. The government is hoping it will pass before existing powers expire on December 15th.
My recollection is that there has never been a piece of legislation which has led to successive protests. Hopefully that will ensure that the provisions in this pandemic bill are not only legally robust but workable.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 7:30's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.